Hi everyone, Happy New Year, and welcome to the next video in the series on Bobby Fischer's My 60 Memorable Games. This time we're going to have a look at a game he played against Vassily Smyslov, the brilliant Soviet Grandmaster who lost the title of World Champion only the year before this game was played, in 1959. It's entitled A Whopper, and Larry Evans gives the introduction as follows. Here is Fischer's first win against Vassily Smyslov, and it's hard to recall when the former world champion conducting white has been so badly outplayed. He goes on a bit further, but it reveals details of the game that I think would ruin the show a bit. So to get into it anyway, Smyslov opened with e4, and as we saw in the last game, Fischer again went into his favourite defence after the booklet. c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, and a6, the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian defence, which was irregular in his opening repertoire throughout his career. Smyslov followed the same line as Keres in the last video with bishop g5, and after e6 played f4, and Fischer again played bishop e7, and not queen b6, the poison pawn variation which he switched to later in his career, which is one of the sharpest openings in all of chess theory. So bishop e7, now queen f3 and queen c7, and these are all still book moves. And then Smyslov castled long, and Fischer played knight bd7, which is almost always better than playing the knight to c6 in the Najdorf. From d7 it can later move to c5 in order to pressurize the pawn here at e4, or it can move to c4 via b6, so it has a lot of flexibility and is also supporting the important defensive knight here on f6. Should white decide to trade his bishop for it, the knight on d7 can capture, and black retains this important defensive knight on f6. And Fischer gives an alternative line to show why it's weak. Instead of knight bd7 here, h6, trying to gain a tempo on the bishop, but this weakens the king side fairly seriously, especially considering that white is castled long, and in general it's better to move pieces rather than pawns in the opening. And the line that Fischer gives now goes bishop h4, knight bd7, bishop d3, b5, and e5, which is the move that starts the fireworks in this variation. Because after bishop b7 attacking the queen, white has the great resource knight takes e6, and black's only reasonable reply is to accept. If he takes the queen, then white is far better after knight takes c7 check. So f takes e6, and now bishop g6 check. And king f8 is the best move for black. And then e takes f6, incredibly, is strong for white. And black's best hope here is knight takes f6, but the resulting position still favors white. If black gets greedy and plays bishop takes f3, then white is winning after f takes e7 check, forcing king g8, and now g takes f3, because black has to give up a rook when the e-pawn queen's here. He can try to stop it with his knight, with knight f6, but now comes bishop takes f6, and after g takes f6, the e-pawn queens, and rook takes c8, bishop takes c8, and white has a good advantage, well over a pawn ahead, objectively speaking, and with proper play, it'll be a one game. So, at this stage, knight bd7 is the right move and not h6. And the game continued with g4. Smyslov immediately gets into the typical Sicilian pawn storm, and Fischer likewise took action on the queen side with b5. And now came bishop takes f6 and knight takes f6. G takes f6 is also possible and sharp. Black gets an extra pawn towards the center and the open g file to work with, but his king safety is slightly compromised. So knight takes f6, now g5, knight d7, and bishop h3. Of this move, Fischer writes, innovation or omission. In either case, after this move, white throws away his theoretical advantage and even loses the initiative. Necessary is a3, where best play goes bishop b7, and here there are two main lines. one of which leads to a fairly boring and drawish position after lots of exchanges. And the other one goes bishop h3, and black castles long, and now f5, which is a sharp pawn sacrifice. An interesting variation is bishop takes e6, so bishop sack, and after f takes e6, knight takes e6, forcing the queen to move, and the best square is c4, attacking the knight here on e6, and taking on d8 favors white overall, and also knight d5 with unclear complications and a sharp position. So that's one possibility in that continuation. And the other one after f5 is the pawn sack. So bishop takes g5 check, and after king b1, e5, and now knight d takes b5, a takes b5, knight takes b5, queen b6 is the best square for the queen. Now knight takes d6 check, king c7, knight takes f7, and bishop f6, where white has 3 connected passed pawns for the bishop, and the black king is dangerously exposed, which is easily enough compensation, and white should be winning without much difficulty. So those are some kind of side variations in the Neudorf, and they're all worth knowing if you're going to learn the opening itself. But anyway, back to the game continuation. Smyslov has just played bishop h3. And now came b4 from Fischer, and this is the reason why it's necessary for white to play a3 instead of that bishop h3 move. And now black is starting to get a small edge overall in the position. Smyslov played knight c e2. Now came bishop b7, applying pressure to e4, and Smyslov now spent a tempo getting his king a bit safer with king b1, but Fischer didn't like this move, giving it a question mark along with the note, in this sharp variation white has no time for such amenities, and gives the alternative knight g3 as the path by which to avoid incurring any serious disadvantage. He also mentions that now sacking on e6 would favour black if bishop takes e6 instead of king b1. If bishop takes e6, f takes e6, knight takes e6, queen c4, knight takes g7 check, king f8, and black is better, objectively speaking, but he'll have to defend carefully for a while. So after king b1, anyway, Fischer plays knight c5, applying more pressure to e4, so now knight g3 to defend it, and now comes d5, intensifying that pressure. Fischer writes, I could see from the expression on Smyslov's face that he already thought he was busted. f5 is how Smyslov answered, sacking a pawn to try and keep some initiative. And the point is that if instead e5 to try and hold on to the e-pawn, now comes g6, making it difficult and time-consuming for white to break through without sacrificing a piece. And Fischer gives the sample continuation, rook c1, queen b6, and now if c3, a5, followed up with castling short, and in Fischer's words, a powerful attack in the works, with these pieces coordinating here strongly against the white king, while white's attack is going to be hard to get underway. And Smyslov's positional judgment was excellent, and he could see that this would lead him to a position with little play if he went into this kind of situation by playing e5. And that's why he decided to sack the pawn instead with f5. So Fischer accepted it, and he accepted it the right way with d takes e4. It's the correct way to capture the sacrificed pawn. Taking with the knight instead, or taking on g5, would favour white in the long run. Okay, that's the end of part 1.